In the middle of a historic blizzard, a 5-year-old boy vanished into the frozen wilderness. On the edge of death, a creature appeared, golden eyes, black fur like living shadow. Not a legend, not a predator, but his savior. When the bullet sliced through the night, the black wolf lunged forward and took the shot. This true story of a bond between boy and wolf defies instinct and rewrites fate itself. The snow was relentless. It hadn't let up for 3 days straight, swallowing the small mountain town of Clearwater Hollow, cradled precariously at the base of the Cascade Range. What once were pine-lined roads had disappeared under feet of snow, transforming the entire landscape into a white wasteland. Rooftops bowed under the weight of ice. Smoke from cabin chimneys struggled against the cold curling weakly into the steel-gray sky. And then the wind shifted. Not a breeze, a force. It howled through the frozen ridges, rattling street signs, gnashing against the edges of broken fences, slipping through every crack like the fingers of something alive. And somewhere inside that storm, headlights sliced feebly through the swirling white. A battered black SUV crept up the mountain's edge tires, slipping fighting for traction. Inside tension hung thick enough to choke. Jason Carter's knuckles were bone white on the steering wheel. His eyes locked forward, pupils flickering as the windshield wipers battled the blinding snow. 36 years old, lean-built from years working construction, jawline dusted with stubble, and eyes darker than the storm itself. Each gust of wind thudded against the vehicle like fists, but Jason didn't flinch. Beside him, Amelia sat stiffly wrapped in 3 layers of coats that couldn't stop the shivering. Her auburn hair was plastered against her cheeks, eyes flicking back again and again toward the rear seat where their son Liam sat. She whispered to herself, without realizing. A quiet mantra. Just hold on. In the back, 5-year-old Liam Carter clutched his blue stuffed wolf to his chest. His legs trembled inside his snow pants. His wide, innocent eyes tracked the distorted shadows of the snowstorm beyond the windows. He didn't speak. Not a word since they'd crossed the last mile marker. Jason's voice broke through the tense silence. Almost there. His tone wasn't hopeful. It was mechanical. Amelia's voice cracked when she answered. Is the cabin road still passable? Jason didn't reply immediately. He leaned forward, squinting, searching for a curve that wasn't there. Finally, he said flatly, if we make the next bend, we're good. But the bend never came. The tires hit black ice. At first it was subtle, a shift beneath them, like the SUV decided to float. Then the world tilted. Jason yanked the wheel right too late. The rear fishtailed, sliding broadside across the ice momentum, pulling them toward the mountain's edge. The engine howled uselessly. Amelia screamed Liam's name. Jason's voice bellowed, hold on! But gravity didn't listen. The SUV spun. The headlights whipped, revealing flashes of pine trunks. Snow exploded across the windshield as they slid off the road, entirely dropping into the trees. Time fractured. Branches slammed against the sides. Bark scraped like claws across metal. Somewhere, metal tore. Amelia's scream dissolved into static. Jason slammed the brakes, but nothing caught. They were falling sideways, weightless. A second of free fall. Then came the impact. Steel met pine at 50 miles an hour. A shudder tore through the frame of the SUV, the crunch of metal folding like paper. A pine trunk split. Snow surged over the hood in a wave. Something cracked. Then silence. For one long moment, nothing moved. Jason's head slumped forward against the wheel, blood trailing from his hairline. Amelia's body hung limp in the seat beside him. Her breath shallow, her ribs struggling against the seatbelt. In the back seat, the blue stuffed wolf lay alone. The rear door had snapped open in the crash. The child was gone. Snow sifted gently down into the hollowed-out carcass of the SUV. Somewhere in the choking silence of the forest, a small voice cried out, "Mommy!" Faint, weak. No one heard. No one. But the trees. Liam Carter lay face down in the snow. His small body half-buried, tiny hands clawing weakly at the drift. His lips were blue. His breath came in sharp, shallow gasps that vanished before they could warm the air. The stuffed wolf had been torn from his grip during the crash. The little boy turned his head slowly, dazed, the world spinning. His cheeks were raw from the wind. His eyelashes clung together with ice. He called again, a pitiful whisper, "Daddy!" No one answered. Snow fell harder, covering his footprints, erasing his presence, claiming him. Liam began crawling. It wasn't instinct, it was desperation. Each movement was agony. He didn't know where he was crawling. There was only white. Above, below, all around. His mittens snagged on a branch tore. His tiny fingers bled into the snow. A shadow loomed, a fallen pine, massive, half buried in ice. Its trunk arched above the ground, forming a narrow hollow beneath its bulk. Liam's arms gave out. He collapsed under the tree. The blizzard thickened. Snow began filling the hollow. Far behind him, Jason Carter stirred. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused blood dripping into one eye. A heartbeat. Then recognition. Liam, he snapped awake. Adrenaline overrode the pain. He clawed at the airbag, fighting free of the crumpled seat. His voice cracked, screaming his son's name into the howling storm. Liam. There was no reply. Jason staggered from the SUV, slipping, crawling. His breath ragged sobs ripping free. His wife lay unconscious. He couldn't carry both. He knew that. Somewhere inside, that realization split him apart. But he could hear nothing. His boy was gone. The snow swallowed every trace. Back under the pine trunk, Liam's small form trembled. His breathing slowed. His lips stopped moving. The snow crept higher. The blizzard raged. Elsewhere, deep in the Cascade Forest, something moved. Far from any trail, far from any human hand, black paws crunched through the snow. A shadow. It glided through the drifts, low to the ground, silent as smoke. A scarred ear flicked. One yellow eye gleamed. The creature was large. Larger than any wolf had a right to be. Its fur was thick black as midnight, matted in places speckled with frost. It carried the scent of wildness, of solitude, of blood. Its ribs moved in quiet rhythm, starved but alive. Its name was forgotten long ago, but once they had called him Blaze, abandoned by his pack, marked for death. Blaze had survived where no others had, not out of strength, out of refusal, out of sheer stubborn rage. He no longer trusted the living, yet something changed that night. He heard it, high, broken, fragile, a sound unlike any he'd ever heard. Not the cry of prey, not the bark of his enemies, but the cry of something small, something dying, something human. Blaze stopped. His scarred muzzle lifted into the snow-choked air. He listened. The storm shrieked, but beneath it, he heard the heartbeat. And against every instinct, he turned toward it, toward the hollow tree, toward the child. Jason Carter collapsed. His knees buckled in the snow. His voice was gone. Amelia stirred behind him, calling faintly. But Jason no longer heard. He knelt in the white void. And somewhere far beyond his sight, his son's heartbeat slowed. And then Blaze reached him. The great wolf stepped silently into the hollow. For a long moment, he only watched. The child didn't move. Blaze's yellow eye flickered. Something old stirred. A memory. A scent. Not food. Not prey. But something else. Fragile. He stepped forward. Slowly. The child whimpered. Barely audible. Blaze hesitated. His ribs heaved once. Then he lay down beside the child, curling his massive body around the small frame. He pressed his warmth against the frozen skin. And the boy, unconscious, breathed once more. The blizzard screamed. But inside the hollow of the fallen pine, there was warmth. There was breath. There was life. And for the first time in years, Blaze closed his eye. And he did not sleep. He guarded. As the snow buried the hollow from view, as the cold raged on, the black wolf stayed. The boy lived. The storm carried no mercy. Above the ridgelines of the Cascade, snow ripped sideways in sheets obliterating shape and distance. Trees bent low under its weight, ancient pines sagging like defeated sentinels. The whiteout swallowed everything. Sound, light, hope. But not him. Not Blaze. The black wolf moved through the blizzard like a living shadow. No path. No destination. Only the rhythmic pulse of survival in his chest, as steady and silent as the falling snow. Every step was deliberate. Every breath counted. His ribs, lean and scar-scored, expanded slowly beneath his thick, ragged coat. His left ear, torn and jagged from an old fight, twitched once beneath a crust of frozen ice. One eye, the right one, was cloudy pale with an old wound. But his left eye, the yellow gleam of it, could cut through the dark like a blade. Once long ago, Blaze had been king of a pack that spanned the northern slopes. A hunter, a leader, a father. But time and betrayal had stolen all that. Humans, their traps, their guns, their noise. They had killed his mate. They had taken his cubs. They had marked him as cursed, and his own pack had driven him out. Blaze no longer trusted the living. Not the scent of prey, nor the whisper of wind. Not even the low growl in his own throat. He trusted one thing. Hunger. Hunger and rage. Those had kept him alive. Until tonight. Because tonight, the wind brought him something else. Something that stopped him mid-step. A sound. A sound so small, so broken, it should have been swallowed by the storm. But Blaze heard it. He froze. His good ear twitched, swiveling. The sound came again. High-pitched. Cracked. Human. The wolf's pupils narrowed. Memories collided in his brain. Flashes of claws, of screams of gunpowder, of blood. Humans meant pain. Always. They burned his forest. They took what was his. Instinct shrieked at him to run, to vanish into the storm. But that sound wasn't like the others. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't a hunter's voice. It was something else. It was pleading. He turned. Step by slow step, Blaze shifted direction, angling toward the broken noise, drawn forward by something older than instinct. something nameless. His paw pads, cracked and bloodied from frostbite, pressed silently through the snowdrifts. A heartbeat, then another, and there the smell hit him. Not fur, not prey, not predator, but skin. Flesh, small, fragile, helpless. The wolf bared his teeth reflexively. A human cub, alone, dying. He should leave. He should, but he couldn't. Blaze's muscles tensed as the trees thinned. His yellow eye swept the clearing ahead, and then he saw it. Tiny, curled, half buried beneath the sagging arc of a fallen pine. The child, a boy, barely a cub, its skin mottled blue. Its breath so shallow even Blaze's sharp hearing struggled to catch them. And the smell death was near. The boy had minutes left. Blaze's tail dropped low. The last time he'd smelled death that close, it had been his own cub. He remembered. The tiny cries, the warmth fading beneath his paws, the nothingness that followed. Pain split through his chest. And yet, he stepped closer. Every bone screamed against it. This was a human. Humans brought ruin. Humans hunted him. Humans destroyed. But this one didn't hold a gun. This one didn't scream. It didn't even see him. The boy's lips trembled. A weak, broken sound escaped. The black wolf stopped, a full yard away, staring. His breath steamed in heavy bursts. Muscles coiled. Fangs bared. Just one step. Just one bite. That was all it would take to end the sound. End the memory. End the confusion. The predator inside him begged for it. He took that step. His paws crunched closer. His muzzle dipped. The boy didn't flinch. Couldn't. He was too far gone. Blaze hovered above him. A heartbeat passed. And another. He lowered his head. His nose brushed bare skin. It was cold. Colder than it should have been. Colder than prey. Colder than death. The smell hit him again. Not fear. Not struggle. But surrender. There was no fight left. Only need. Only silence. Blaze recoiled as if struck. He staggered backward, claws digging grooves into the snow. Something cracked inside his skull. His vision split. He saw two images. His own dead cub limp beneath a snowdrift, and this boy breathing shallowly beneath the pine. The same. Different. He couldn't tell. The memory gnawed at him, tearing the edges of his sanity. No, he wasn't human. He wasn't their guardian. He wasn't anything anymore. Just a ghost. But the boy trembled. Barely. One small unconscious shiver. And Blaze's choice ended. He moved forward. Not quickly. Not smoothly. As if dragged by a force outside himself. He curled his body slowly, painfully around the boy. His ribs pressed against the fragile frame. His thick, matted fur smothered the cold air between them. He tucked his tail over the child's bare legs. The black wolf, once king of the mountain, lay down beside the human cub. And he stayed. Breath after breath. The storm screamed above. Snow buried the hollow deeper. But inside there was warmth now. A trembling, fragile circle of heat radiating from predator to prey. Except this wasn't prey. Blaze didn't understand what this was. He only understood that it was his. His to protect. His to guard. Until dawn. Or death. Whichever came first. The boy whimpered. Blaze didn't move. His yellow eye flickered open once. Watched. Listened. And as the snow sealed them from sight, Blaze pressed closer. Not for comfort, but to fight the cold. Because he wasn't saving the boy. He was fighting the storm. And for once, he didn't fight alone. The small heart beneath his ribs still beat. That was enough. For now. Blaze did not sleep. Hours slipped past, but to him, time was meaningless. The blizzard continued to claw at the forest, shrieking through the treetops like some ancient starving god. Snow battered down in relentless waves. But within the hollow of the fallen pine, it was silent. Silent, except for the steady, fragile rhythm of the child's breathing. Blaze's body curved protectively around Liam, the thick black of his fur, a living wall against the cold. His tail, matted and stiff, lay draped across the boy's legs. His ribs expanded with each slow, measured breath, releasing faint clouds of steam into the frozen air. His eye remained open, unblinking, watching. He could feel it. Death. Lurking close, waiting. Not yet. Each time Liam's breathing weakened, Blaze shifted. His battered frame pressed tighter, trapping the boy's body heat, refusing to let it escape. Blaze didn't understand why. But some ancient command had lodged itself deep within him the moment he'd felt that tiny heartbeat against his ribs. Protect. Even now, as his muscles trembled from fatigue as ice formed in the clumps of his tangled fur, Blaze obeyed that silent command. But the storm was patient. And hunger? Hunger could not be ignored. Blaze lifted his head slowly, reluctantly, muscles aching as he peeled himself from Liam's side. For a moment he hesitated, the predator inside him, warring with something older, something fragile. He had to hunt, or neither of them would survive the dawn. With one final glance at the boy, Blaze stood. Snowflakes crusted the scars across his shoulders, settling in the grooves of old wounds. His paws sunk deep into the snow as he stepped from the hollow. The cold hit him like knives. Every instinct screamed for him to return to the boy's warmth. But he couldn't. Not yet. He vanished into the storm. Hours passed. Deep within the Cascade woods, Blaze hunted. The snow blinded him. His right eye, clouded from a wound long past, was nearly useless. But his left eye burned bright. His nose, frostbitten and scarred, still caught the faintest threads of scent. A hare, somewhere nearby. Too small. Not enough. But Blaze followed. He didn't run. He stalked. Silent. Precise. The hare darted beneath the low boughs of a snow-covered cedar. Blaze lunged. His muscles exploded in motion jaws, snapping forward body a blur of black against white. He missed. His paws slipped in the powder. Pain shot up his old highway injury, a fracture that had never healed right. The hare vanished. Blaze stood chest-heaving, nostrils flaring. Failure. But there was no time for defeat. He turned. His ears twitched. A new scent. Fainter, but different. Musky. Oily. Meat. The remains of something dead. Blaze followed, and found it. A rabbit half-eaten, buried beneath frost, left behind by some careless predator. Frozen. Stiff. But Blaze did not hesitate. He dragged it free with his jaws teeth cracking bone, and turned back toward the hollow, toward the child. When Blaze returned, Liam's breathing was weaker. His small form lay still beneath the arc of the tree. His cheeks, what little skin was visible, had turned pale as moonlight. Blaze dropped the rabbit beside the boy, then paused. What was he doing? This wasn't his cub. He couldn't feed this creature. It didn't make sense. But then Liam whimpered, barely a sound. Blaze's snarl died in his throat. Without thinking, he used his muzzle to nudge the frozen meat closer to the boy's lips. Liam didn't respond. Blaze growled softly, not in anger, but in command. Eat. Still nothing. He licked the boy's cheek once. No movement. The wolf stood over the child, trembling now, from cold, from hunger, from confusion. His instincts rebelled, but his heart disobeyed. So Blaze did the only thing he knew. He lay down again, curled tighter, and waited. The storm was not finished. Hours later, Blaze's body jerked awake. Not from cold, from scent. Danger. His eyes snapped open, muscles locked. He knew the smell. Not wolf, not human. Worse. Lingered with desperation. A hyena, not native to these mountains. Escaped, perhaps, from where Blaze didn't know. But the scent was wrong. Sick, twisted, starving. And it was coming. Fast. Blaze stood slowly, careful not to jostle the boy. His fur bristled. Every scar ignited. His lips peeled back, a silent snarl splitting his muzzle. The hyena's footsteps crunched in the snow, circling. It smelled weakness. It smelled prey. It smelled the child. A growl built low in Blaze's throat. Protect. Again that word. Louder now. He stepped forward, shielding Liam's body with his own. The first flash of movement came from his left. Blaze spun, hackles raised. The hyena lunged, mad, ribs jutting from its sides, eyes wild, foam at its lips. It wasn't hunting. It was dying. And it wanted to take something with it. Blaze met it head on. Their bodies collided in the snow with a bone-cracking thud. Fangs clashed. Blood sprayed. Blaze's scarred ear tore further as the hyena's teeth found flesh, but he didn't retreat. He bit down, hard. His jaws closed over the hyena's shoulder, crunching bone. The hyena shrieked, kicked. Its claws raked Blaze's ribs. Blaze's eye burned, but he held until the hyena tore free, leaving a chunk of its own flesh in his teeth. It staggered back, and Blaze charged. Rage carried him now, not for himself, for the child behind him. He slammed the hyena into a drift, driving it down. He bit, and bit, and bit, until it stopped moving, until its cries died in the snow. Blood, so much blood, red against white. Blaze stood over the corpse, panting, his legs shaking. His left side bled freely. His vision swam, but the threat was gone. He turned, limped back to the hollow. The boy hadn't moved. Blaze collapsed beside him, his breath shallow. He curled around Liam once more. His blood mingled with the snow, but he did not sleep. Could not. Not yet. Dawn threatened. A pale, ghostly light seeped through the treetops. Blaze felt it, knew it, but he had no strength left. And then a sound, soft, faint, a whisper. Daddy? Blaze's eye opened. Slow. Liam stirred. The boy's lips trembled. His eyes fluttered. Blue, unfocused, but alive. And then their eyes met. The boy, the wolf. And in that moment, there was no fear. Not in Liam's gaze. Not even confusion. Only trust. Fragile. Inexplicable. Blaze didn't understand. He only knew one thing. He would kill the world to protect that look. The boy's small hand shifted, brushed weakly against Blaze's fur. And Blaze, broken, bleeding, guarding the cub of his enemy, closed his eye and stayed. Snow kept falling. Jason Carter staggered through it like a broken shadow, his breath heaving, raw lungs burning in the frigid air. His eyes, bloodshot and cracked from sleepless hours, searched blindly through walls of white. Every tree looked the same. Every drift mocked him. His boots sank deep with each step, knees trembling, hands bare and bleeding. His gloves had been lost somewhere miles back. He didn't care. Liam. The name cracked apart in the storm, devoured by the wind. No answer. Jason stopped, bent forward, hands shaking as he braced himself against a half-buried pine trunk. His forehead pressed against frozen bark. Breathe. Just breathe. But the thought betrayed him, because breathing meant he was still alive. And if he was alive, then why wasn't his son? The scream tore from his throat before he even felt it rising. A sound not meant for human lungs. Something primal. Something empty. He dropped to his knees. Behind him, Ethan Monroe watched helplessly. Jason's childhood friend, now captain of the county search and rescue, stood silent. His coat flapped in the storm frost, clinging to his beard. His thermal goggles were useless in this whiteout. Only instinct kept him from losing Jason completely in the snow. Ethan stepped forward. His voice was low, calm, controlled. Jason? No response. Jay, get up. Jason shook his head, slow and broken. I lost him. You didn't. I did. You didn't. Jason's body shook harder now. He's gone, Ethan. I can't hear him anymore. I can't. Ethan knelt beside him. You listen to me. You got minutes left. Before hypothermia takes you, before you're no use to him or Amelia, you stand up, right now, and we keep moving. And we keep. Jason looked at him then, eyes hollow, but the flicker remained. Ethan grabbed his shoulder fingers, digging in. We find him, Jay, or we die trying. Jason closed his eyes and stood. Elsewhere in a hospital bed, lit by failing generator lights, Amelia Carter lay silent. Her skin was pale. Oxygen tubes framed her cheeks, but the heart monitor beside her beeped. Steady. Faint, but steady. A nurse checked her vitals, whispered something kind. Amelia didn't answer. She stared at the ceiling lips, unmoving. Outside the window, the blizzard howled, and the mother of a missing child stopped praying. She'd already prayed. Nothing answered. Back in the forest, Ethan and Jason pushed forward. Each step was a negotiation with death. Snow waist-deep, breaths labored, hope a concept neither dared to speak aloud. They reached what looked like a clearing. Jason stumbled. Ethan caught him. Wait, what? Jason froze, his face twisted, his ears strained. Ethan listened too. Nothing. Just the wind. Jason's body sagged. Then, a sound. Faint. Wrong. Not human. Not the wind. Something older. Jason's heart stopped. What was that? Ethan's mouth opened, but he couldn't answer. Then it came again. A howl. Not sharp. Not aggressive. Low. Drawn. Mourning. A wolf. Jason spun, eyes wild. Did you hear that? Ethan nodded slowly. Jason's voice cracked. That's him. Ethan shook his head. That's a wolf. Jason's voice broke. That's him. And then Jason was moving. Without waiting, without thinking. Ethan swore and followed. Miles away, curled inside the hollowed tree, Blaze lifted his scarred muzzle to the sky. And he howled. He didn't understand why. It wasn't for hunger. It wasn't to summon a pack. He had no pack. It was instinct. Something older than survival. Something that whispered, bring them to the boy. So Blaze sang to the storm. A long, broken, lonely song. A song of things lost. A song of things worth saving. The boy shivered beneath his body. Blaze kept singing. Jason ran, stumbling, falling, crawling. Ethan yelled after him, but Jason didn't stop. Every instinct in his body, every broken shard of reason, every heartbeat screamed at him. Follow the sound. The wolf's howl. The wolf's voice. Jason's feet bled inside his boots. His fingers were cracked, blue ruined. He didn't care. He followed. He had to. That sound wasn't hunting him. It wasn't warning him. It was waiting for him. Behind them, Ethan called over the radio, voice shaking. This is Search 1. I've got possible auditory. Wolf, repeating. Possible auditory. Human correlation. East quadrant. Cascade sector 2. Static. Then, copy that. Search 1. Confirm, Wolf. Ethan looked back at Jason's silhouette vanishing into the trees. His voice cracked. Negative. Confirming. Something else. Jason collapsed at the base of a ridge. He couldn't move. He couldn't see. But the howl came again. Closer, he sobbed. Liam, I'm coming. The storm answered. And somewhere in the dark, Blaze howled once more. And for the first time that night, Jason Carter believed. Not in himself, not in hope, but in the voice of something he didn't understand. A wolf, calling him home. The snow was different now. Ethan felt it first. He stopped mid-step, raising a gloved fist, signaling Jason to halt. Jason, shaking half delirious, stumbled to a stop beside him, gasping for air, eyes wild. What is it? Why are we stopping? Ethan said nothing. His gaze dropped to the snow. Jason followed his line of sight. Tracks. Fresh. Impossible. Jason's heart slammed against his ribs. Liam. Ethan shook his head slowly, voice tight, not human. Jason froze. Wolf tracks. But something wasn't right. Ethan crouched, brushing away loose snow with trembling hands, exposing the full shape of the prints beneath. Large, wide-set, heavy, leading uphill, steady, deliberate, not the scatter of a predator chasing prey. This was purposeful. It was leading. Jason fell to his knees beside the tracks, staring as if at some ancient scripture written in snow, wherever it went. Ethan whispered, voice hoarse, it wants us to follow. Jason didn't hesitate. He pushed himself up, stumbling after the prince. Ethan hesitated. Every instinct, every training manual screamed at him to turn back, to regroup, to analyze. But something deeper, something older told him Jason was right. So he followed. Into the white. Blaze did not look back. Every step he pressed into the snow behind him was a choice. Each paw print deliberate. The men were coming. The scent of them, tainted with fear and sorrow, carried easily to his nostrils now. But Blaze felt no threat. No need to hide. Not tonight. The boy's breath was weakening. Time was no longer an ally. So he led them, slowly, purposefully, to the hollow, to the cub. Jason's world collapsed down to one thing, those prints. He stumbled after them blindly, Ethan at his side. They followed the wolf's trail across drifts, through narrow gaps between leaning pines, beneath ice-heavy branches that tore at their coats and faces. Jason didn't care. He wouldn't stop. Not until those prints stopped. And then they did. At the crest of a small ridge, the tracks circled once, then vanished beneath the broken arch of a massive fallen pine. Jason's heart shattered. No, please. Ethan caught up. His flashlight cut through the dark landing on the hollow beneath the trunk. There, movement. Jason dropped the light. He ran. Blaze stood motionless. His black coat blended with the shadows inside the hollow. One yellow eye watched as Jason Carter slid down the slope toward him, half sobbing, half screaming. Blaze didn't snarl, didn't bare his teeth. He didn't move. The boy lay curled against his ribs, the child's small face nearly lost beneath frost and clinging snow. Blaze's body, scarred and bloodied from the night's battles, remained curved protectively around him. Guarding, waiting. Jason fell to his knees before the hollow. The moment his eyes locked on his son, something inside him broke. Liam. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a cry. It was a prayer, a single shattered word. He crawled forward, trembling, reaching. Blaze didn't retreat. For a heartbeat, the man and the wolf simply stared at each other. Jason's hands shook violently, his entire body convulsed. And then Blaze moved. Not backwards, not away. He stepped aside. Slow, silent, deliberate. He stepped away from the child. Jason let out a sob, lunging forward, scooping Liam's tiny frozen body into his arms. Liam, oh my God. Oh my God, Liam. The boy stirred faintly. Jason screamed for Ethan, who was already radioing for evac, his voice cracking, breath hitching. Jason rocked his son back and forth in the snow. Tears freezing to his cheeks, cradling Liam to his chest, pressing his lips against the child's forehead, desperate for warmth, for life. I got you, buddy. I got you. Dad's here. Dad's here, Liam. Don't leave me. Don't leave me. Liam whimpered weakly, his small fingers twitching against Jason's soaked jacket. Jason sobbed harder. Behind him, Ethan dropped to his knees, the flashlight trembling in his grip. They'd found him. Against every goddamn rule of nature, they'd found him. And then Ethan saw it, in the shadows of the hollow. A figure, motionless, watching. A black wolf, eyes burning gold. Ethan's hand reached instinctively for the sidearm strapped beneath his coat. But he stopped. The wolf wasn't attacking. It wasn't running. It was waiting, watching. Jason rocked his son, whispering broken apologies. Ethan whispered Jason's name, nodding toward the shadows. Jason turned and saw it. Blaze. For a long, terrible moment, time froze. Jason didn't speak. Neither did Ethan. They simply stared at the creature that had been the last warmth their child had known. Jason's throat worked. He couldn't speak. He wanted to thank it, but he didn't know how. And Blaze? Blaze simply stood there. His ribs heaved. His old wound bled slowly, staining his flank. He was exhausted, starving, wounded, and yet he remained. Until Liam shifted, a soft, broken sound escaped the boy's lips. Blaze heard it. That was enough. Without a sound, the wolf turned and walked away. One step. Two. Jason watched helplessly as the black figure disappeared into the trees. No sound. No howl. No trace. Ethan whispered, reverent. What the hell was that? Jason held his son tighter and whispered back. A guardian. When the chopper finally arrived, its lights cutting through the storm like daggers. Jason stood atop the ridge, Liam pressed to his chest. Ethan stood behind him, silent. Neither spoke. Neither moved. And deep within the woods, unseen by any of them, Blaze stopped, once glanced back toward the lights, and vanished into the darkness. Alone once more, but not empty. Not tonight. The doctors didn't understand how the boy was alive. They called him a miracle. Whispered it like a confession in the sterile halls of Timber Ridge Medical Center. 5 years old. Exposed more than 12 hours. Core temperature should have been incompatible with life. No frostbite, no cardiac arrest. He should be dead, but he wasn't. Liam Carter, the boy who disappeared in the storm, lay breathing beneath heated blankets in ICU room 3. His cheeks, once drained of color, had started to flush faintly. His small hands, curled like fragile leaves, twitched under the oxygen tubes taped to his face. Monitors beeped steadily beside him, though every nurse who passed the door glanced twice, like expecting them to flatline. Because by every rule of medicine, this child should not be breathing. Jason sat beside the hospital bed without moving. For hours, his face hollow, his hands unmoving. The world outside the glass walls raged in silence. Ethan stood nearby, staring through the observation window, arms folded tightly across his chest. He didn't speak. Not because there was nothing to say, but because Jason no longer responded. Finally, the doctor came, a round man with tired eyes and a clipboard gripped too tightly in one hand. His voice was low, almost guilty. "He's stable." Jason didn't react. "He's breathing without assistance now. Reflexes are weak, but present. Heart rhythms irregular, but holding." Jason stared at his son's face. The doctor cleared his throat. "We're calling him the Cascade Miracle." Jason's eyes flicked toward him then. Not gratitude, not hope. Something harder, something heavier. "Don't!" The doctor blinked. Jason's voice was dead. "Don't call him that." Downstairs in the debriefing room, where the rescue team had been forced to gather, Jason sat alone at the end of the long metal table. His knuckles were raw, split-bandaged poorly. His eyes were bloodshot. His voice flat. "It wasn't the cold." The others exchanged glances. Jason continued. "It wasn't luck, or God, or fate." No one interrupted. Jason leaned forward. It was a wolf. Silence stretched across the room like something physical. A cough from Ethan. A glance toward the attending sheriff. Jason's voice tightened. "I saw it. So did Ethan." Heads turned. Ethan shifted, visibly uncomfortable. "I saw something," he admitted cautiously. "Looked like a wolf, yeah." Jason's knuckles whitened. Not something. It stayed with him, kept him alive. The lead medic cleared his throat, gentle but firm. "Jason, you were severely hypothermic. You'd been out there for nearly 18 hours. Hallucinations aren't uncommon. The mind." "I wasn't hallucinating." Jason's voice cracked like breaking ice. "I held my son's body in my arms, and it was warm." Silence. "I followed its tracks, all the way to the hollow. It wasn't running from me." One of the rookies laughed nervously, then looked away when no one joined him. Jason stood abruptly, the chair scraping behind him. "I'm going to find it." The room stared. "Jason, I'm going to find it." Then he left. That night, Liam stirred. For the first time since his rescue, the boy opened his eyes. Slow, flickering, confused. Jason was there, immediately. Bent over him, tears choking his throat. "Liam. Oh God, buddy. Hey. It's me. It's Dad. You're safe. You're okay. I've got you." Liam's lips trembled. His eyes darted unfocused, searching shadows beyond the hospital lights. Jason cupped his son's cheeks gently. "I'm here, Liam. I'm right here." Liam's voice came then, a whisper. A sound so soft Jason thought he imagined it. "The Black Wolf." Jason froze. "What?" Liam blinked slowly, lips dry, cracking. "The Black Wolf, Daddy." Jason swallowed hard. Liam's breathing hitched. "It stayed with me." Jason pressed his forehead to his son's. His body shook. Liam whispered again. "It didn't leave." Jason's tears fell silently. "I know, buddy. I know." The nightmares began that same night. Liam would wake screaming softly, not in terror, but in confusion, in loss. He called for it, over and over. "The Black Wolf. Where's the Black Wolf?" Jason sat beside his bed every night, and every time he gave the same promise. "I'll find it, Liam." He didn't know if his son heard him, but Jason knew, and he meant it. He would find it. Nurses whispered about him in the halls. The father who barely spoke, who barely slept, who refused to leave the room, except when he disappeared into the woods outside town alone. They said grief had broken him. They said he was chasing ghosts. Jason didn't care, because each night when his son called for the wolf, Jason felt the same thing. A presence, watching, waiting. He knew it wasn't over. Not yet. The wolf was still out there, and Jason Carter would not stop. Not until he looked it in the eyes once more and said thank you. The snow had begun to melt. Not entirely, not yet, but enough for Jason to see it. The first print appeared 2 days after Liam came home. Jason had been chopping wood behind the house when he noticed it half buried near the porch steps, a single depression in the thinning crust of snow. He crouched immediately, heart pounding. Wide, heavy, 4 toes, no claw marks. Wolf, but bigger than any print Jason had seen in the mountains. Broader, deeper. It wasn't fresh, but it wasn't old either. Jason stood slowly, scanning the perimeter of the clearing where his house sat alone, flanked by woods. Nothing. Stillness. Yet, something lingered, like breath held just beyond his hearing. He forced himself to move. A second print nearer to the woodpile. Then another leading toward the side of the house. Jason followed. His pulse hammered, not out of fear, something worse. Recognition. The tracks circled the house, methodical, careful. A pattern. A patrol. It wasn't stalking. It wasn't hunting. Jason understood. It was watching. That night, long after Amelia had fallen into uneasy sleep, Jason stood on the back porch, holding a butcher's bone in both hands. Fresh, meaty, heavy with marrow. He left it at the edge of the tree line, not as bait, as an offering. Then he waited. For hours, but the forest remained silent. No movement, no eyes. By dawn, the bone remained untouched. He left it there. The next night, the same. And the next. By the 4th morning, the snow around the offering had melted slightly from the weak sun. Jason found it precisely where he'd left it, but not untouched, not eaten. Instead, something had buried it. Carefully, respectfully, Jason stood over the shallow clawed scrape in the earth and whispered aloud, "You're not hungry." He realized then it wasn't there for food. The following night, Jason couldn't sleep. Neither could Liam. The boy had begun waking again, the old nightmares returning. But not from fear, from longing. Jason sat beside his bed as the boy tossed beneath layers of quilts. Liam's voice broke through the darkness, no louder than a breath. "Why won't he come back?" Jason swallowed hard. "He's not gone, buddy." Liam turned toward him, his blue eyes glassy in the moonlight. "You don't know that." Jason reached out, resting a calloused hand over his son's. "I do." "How?" Jason's throat worked. "Because I feel him." The boy said nothing more. But Jason didn't sleep that night. Sometime after midnight, when the forest was silent and even the wind had died, Jason sat alone in the living room. No lights, no movement, just listening. And then it happened. He felt it before he saw it. A presence. Heavy, measured, not threat. Something older. Jason rose, breath caught in his throat, and turned toward the window of Liam's bedroom. He crossed the house without sound, bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The boy's door stood ajar. Jason stepped inside and froze. At the window, framed in silver moonlight, stood the silhouette. Large, motionless, unmistakable. A wolf. Jason couldn't move. His heart cracked inside his chest. Because it wasn't a shadow. It wasn't his mind. It was real. The black fur shimmered faintly in the moon's glow, scars etched like old runes across its flanks. One ear hung ragged. The other twitched once. But its eye, that golden eye, burned through the glass. Unblinking, silent, watching. Jason's gaze dropped slowly. Liam lay beneath the blankets, small chest rising and falling steadily. Blissfully unaware, Jason looked back. The wolf's gaze never left the boy. Jason's fingers curled into fists, not out of fear, but from the crushing weight of understanding. He wasn't here for Jason. He wasn't even here for thanks. He was here for Liam, the guardian, the sentinel. Jason's knees buckled slightly. He whispered so softly it barely left his lips. "You're not a predator." The wolf didn't flinch, didn't blink. Jason stepped forward. Carefully, slowly, the wolf didn't move. Jason stood inches from the window now, the only thing separating them, a thin pane of frosted glass. The wolf watched him, measured, ancient. Jason's breath fogged the glass. "I'm not afraid of you." The wolf's ear twitched. Jason placed his palm flat against the window, and for a single heartbeat, he swore the wolf leaned forward ever so slightly, as if acknowledging the gesture. Then, as silently as it had appeared, the black wolf turned and melted back into the darkness, leaving Jason standing there, hand pressed against the cold glass. A father no longer praying for protection, but silently thanking the one who provided it. Jason didn't tell Amelia, or the doctors, or the sheriff. He didn't tell anyone, because it wasn't something to explain. It was something to understand. And in that moment, in the deep silence after the wolf vanished, Jason Carter understood one thing with absolute certainty. The black wolf was not gone. He was waiting, watching. And Jason, for the first time in his life, was grateful. Not to a man, not to a god, but to the beast beyond the tree line. A silent guardian, a shadow in the snow, the reason his son still breathed. And Jason Carter would not forget that, ever. The next morning, Jason woke before the sun. His body trembled not from exhaustion, but from what he had seen, what he knew. He stepped outside, barefoot, the cold biting instantly at his skin. But Jason didn't feel it. His eyes scanned the edge of the tree line, the spot where the black silhouette had vanished only hours before. Nothing. Still, Jason whispered, "I know you're there." No answer, no sound. But Jason wasn't expecting one. He turned his breath, hanging pale in the morning air. Then he saw it, near the porch steps, not far from where he'd left the offering. A single print, pressed carefully into the soft earth where the snow had melted overnight. Fresh. Jason crouched, swallowing against the tightness in his throat. 4 toes, no claw marks. Broad, heavy. He brushed snow away, slowly, reverently, as if unveiling something sacred. The print wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a message. Jason felt it like a weight in his chest. "I'm still watching." He stood staring into the endless trees. "You're not just a wolf," he said aloud. "You're family." That night, Jason prepared food again. Not meat, not bait, something different. He sliced bread. Warm, fresh from the oven, the same way his mother had once made it after a storm. He placed it near the tree line, without a word. He didn't wait. He didn't watch. He simply left it there. By dawn, the bread was gone. No tracks, no disturbance. But Jason understood. It wasn't hunger. It was trust. A trust Jason hadn't earned. But Liam had. Each night after that, Jason found himself drifting to Liam's room after midnight. Not because the boy called out, but because Jason hoped. Hoped to see those golden eyes watching from the window again. Days passed. The snow melted. Spring crept in quietly. But Jason still waited. Until one night, deep into the silence, Liam stirred. Jason sat beside him, rubbing his son's back gently. Then Liam spoke. "He's outside." Jason froze. "What, buddy?" Liam's voice was certain, calm. "The black wolf." Jason's heart stopped. "Where?" Liam's small hand lifted, pointing at the window. Jason turned, and there, standing where moonlight kissed the frost-kissed grass, was the silhouette. Black, silent, watching. Jason stood, but he didn't move closer. Not this time. He understood now. The wolf wasn't here for him. Blaze had never been. Jason watched from the doorway, arms folded tight across his chest as Liam slept peacefully once more. And the black wolf kept his vigil, the boy's silent protector, a presence Jason no longer feared, but welcomed. Jason Carter never told anyone about that night. It wasn't a story. It was a promise. And every night after Jason left the porch light burning, not to scare the shadows away, but to guide the one who belonged in them, back to where he was needed, back to his rightful place, outside his son's window, watching, guarding, and waiting. Jason couldn't sleep anymore. Even when the house was silent and Liam lay safely tucked in his bed, Jason's mind wouldn't let go. Something gnawed at him, something older than fear, deeper than instinct. The black wolf hadn't just saved his son. It had chosen to. But why? Jason found himself standing again near the tree line the next morning, staring at the dark edge of the woods where Blaze always disappeared. And questions haunted him. It didn't make sense. A predator should have devoured a helpless child. A stray should have disappeared after the storm. But Blaze had stayed, watched, guarded. Jason needed answers. And so, for the first time in his life, he went looking. It started at the edge of the county. Jason tracked down an old hunter, a man known only as Harland, who claimed to know the wolves of Cascade better than anyone alive. He lived alone in a shack deep in the valley where rumors outnumbered visitors. Jason didn't knock. He simply waited. Eventually, Harland opened the door. Wolf tracks the old man. Rasped eyes narrow beneath a battered hat. Ain't a good sign. Jason shook his head. I'm not here to kill him. Harland's expression didn't change. Jason hesitated. I need to know what happened to him. Harland studied him for a long, long moment. Then he stepped aside. Inside the cabin, Jason listened, and slowly the truth came together. Harland spoke of the pack once known as the Ridge Kings, a massive family of black-furred wolves that ruled the northern slopes a decade earlier. Blaze had been their leader, marked by size, and the telltale torn ear from a fight for dominance long before Harland had tracked him. They were ghosts, Harland muttered. Silent, efficient, smarter than any pack I'd ever seen. Until the hunters came, out-of-state contractors. Illegal traps, poisoned bait, trophy hunts, a massacre. They didn't just kill the adults, Harland whispered. They hunted the cubs. Jason sat silent, fists trembling. But Blaze, he survived, the old man said finally. Don't know how, don't know why, but he did. Why didn't he leave? Jason asked, voice hollow. Harland spat into the fire. Because revenge is colder than death. Jason shook his head. That's not why. Harland's gaze flickered. Jason stood and walked out. The drive home blurred. Jason gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Harland's words echoing like gunshots. They slaughtered his family. And yet, when Blaze found a child alone in the snow, he didn't finish what humans started. He protected him. Jason felt something fracture inside his chest. He pulled the truck over halfway home, stumbled out, and dropped to his knees in the snow, and wept because he finally understood. Blaze wasn't vengeance. He was grief. And that grief had saved his son. Jason stopped seeing a predator after that day. He started seeing a guardian. And he knew what he had to do next. Liam deserved to meet the one who saved him. Not from Jason's arms, but from his own past. 3 days later, Jason stood at the tree line again. But he wasn't alone. Beside him, Liam held his father's hand tightly. Jason knelt down, steadying his voice as best he could. You remember what I told you, buddy? Liam nodded, once eyes wide, not with fear, but with something deeper. Hope. Jason smiled faintly. He's close, but he's not going to come if he thinks you're scared. I'm not, Liam whispered. He won't hurt us. Jason swallowed past the lump in his throat. I know. He took Liam's smaller hand in his, guiding him step by slow step into the woods. Not far. Just enough. They reached the clearing where the old pine split like a broken rib cage. Jason stopped there and waited. Minutes passed. Silence. Then a rustle. Jason felt it before he saw it. A weight in the air. A presence pressing from the shadows beyond. Liam felt it too. He didn't flinch. He let go of Jason's hand and stepped forward. Jason's heart seized. Liam, but the boy didn't look back. He stood alone now, brave, silent, waiting, and then Blaze appeared. From between the trees, a black shadow slipping into the clearing like something carved from the night itself. He didn't growl. He didn't snarl. He simply watched, his golden eye flickering. Jason's hand clenched helplessly. But Liam smiled. Hi. The words shattered Jason's chest. Blaze didn't react, but he didn't run. That was enough. Liam crouched low, copying what Jason had taught him. Palms flat to the earth, eyes down, no sudden movements. The wolf watched. Minutes passed like hours. Then Blaze stepped forward. Once, twice, closer. Jason's breath hitched, but he stayed silent. Blaze stopped within a few yards of the boy. The distance was intentional, respectful, but it wasn't rejection. It was permission, Liam whispered. Thank you. Blaze's ear twitched. And in that moment, Jason understood something no human had before. Blaze wasn't forgiving them. He wasn't trusting them. He was choosing them. Then as silently as he had come, Blaze turned and vanished back into the forest. Not running, not hiding, but waiting. Jason ran to his son, dropping to his knees, pulling him close. Liam whispered into his father's ear. He remembers. Jason couldn't answer, because in that moment, for the first time since the blizzard, Jason Carter believed in miracles. And their name wasn't God. It was Blaze. The forest felt different that morning. Not silent, not hostile, alive. Jason knew it the moment they crossed the tree line. He could feel the air change, could sense the presence pressing from the trees. This wasn't the same forest that had swallowed his son all those weeks ago. Today the forest was watching and waiting. Jason's hand tightened gently around Liam's smaller one. You ready? He whispered. Liam didn't speak. He simply nodded, eyes wide, but calm. They kept walking. Each step was deliberate, each breath controlled. Jason didn't lead the way. Liam did. Somehow the boys seemed to know where to go. Instinct, memory, something deeper. Finally the boy stopped. Jason froze behind him. They were standing at the edge of a narrow clearing. The pines parted in a perfect arc, snow thinning into patches of pine needles beneath their boots. Liam didn't move. Jason felt his throat tighten, because he saw it. At the far edge of the clearing, a shape. Dark, massive, motionless. Blaze. The black wolf stood perfectly still watching them. His golden eyes shimmered faintly in the morning light. But something had changed. His gaze no longer carried the cold detachment of a predator. It was softer. Not weak, but no longer guarded. Liam released Jason's hand. Jason instinctively reached to stop him. But something inside told him not to. This wasn't his moment. It was Liam's. The boy stepped forward. 1 step. 2. 3. And Blaze didn't move. Didn't retreat. Didn't tense. He stood waiting. Jason watched, barely breathing. Liam stopped just shy of 10 feet from the black wolf. Then he spoke. Hi. His voice didn't tremble. Blaze's ears twitched, but the wolf stayed still. Liam crouched carefully, mimicking the way Jason had taught him. Small, non-threatening, present. Jason's pulse pounded in his ears. And then after what felt like forever, Blaze moved. Slow, controlled. He stepped forward, once. Then again, until only a few feet separated them. Jason felt something shift deep in his chest. Terror. No. Reverence. Liam lifted his small hand. Palm out. Silent. Inviting. And Blaze leaned forward. Closer. The distance shrank to nothing. Jason's knees buckled, but he held himself upright, refusing to interfere. He was witnessing something sacred. And then impossibly Blaze lowered his massive head and pressed his scarred muzzle gently against the boy's hand. Liam smiled. Jason Carter's vision blurred with tears, because in that moment he understood. Blaze had never been a monster. He had never been lost. He had only been waiting for someone worth protecting. And now, he had found him. Jason stepped forward slowly, heart thundering. Blaze's eye flicked toward him, but didn't harden. Didn't warn. Jason knelt beside his son. And then without a word, he lowered his head. He bowed, not from fear, but from gratitude. And Blaze understood, because the wolf stepped forward, closing the final inches. And Jason felt it. The coarse fur beneath his fingertips. The warmth. The life. The forgiveness. And for the first time, Jason Carter let himself believe that not all debts had to be paid in blood. Some could be repaid in trust, and he would honor it. Jason kept his hand pressed against Blaze's fur for as long as the wolf allowed. Not long, a few seconds, but it was enough. Enough to bridge the impossible. Blaze pulled back slowly, his breath steady. His golden eye flicked between Jason and Liam, not uncertain, not defensive. Evaluating, understanding. Jason stayed crouched, not daring to break the fragile moment. Liam whispered, "Don't leave." Blaze held his gaze. Then he stepped back, a single step. Jason felt the boy's breath hitch. But Jason understood. "It's okay, Liam." The boy shook his head fiercely. "He's ours." Jason smiled softly, painfully. "No, we're his." Blaze didn't move immediately. Jason stood resting a steadying hand on Liam's shoulder. "We have to let him choose." Liam looked up at his father, eyes glistening. Jason nodded. "This isn't his place." Liam's voice cracked, "But he saved me." Jason's own throat burned. "I know." Blaze turned, silent, calm, and walked toward the tree line. Each step was deliberate, heavy, weighted not with hesitation, but certainty. Liam took an involuntary step after him. Jason gently held him back. "No, buddy." "Why?" Jason swallowed. "Because real guardians don't stay in the light. They stay where they're needed." Liam's small body shook. Jason pulled him close. And together father and son watched as the black wolf disappeared into the shadows once more. Not fleeing, not hiding, but choosing. Jason whispered more to himself than his son. "And we'll wait until you're ready." The forest closed behind Blaze, but Jason Carter felt no emptiness. Not this time, because he knew the wolf wasn't gone. He was simply free, and Jason would honor that. He had to, because when you owe your child's life to a shadow, you don't ask it to follow. You let it lead, wherever it chooses. They came quietly. 3 trucks, dust-caked, windowless, engines still warm from miles of hard driving. They pulled into Timber Ridge just after sundown, parking near the edge of the old sawmill where no one would notice them. But Jason Carter noticed. He always noticed now. He watched from the shadows, his breath white in the cold air, as 4 men stepped out. Not locals, not loggers, not hikers. Their movements were too precise, purposeful, controlled. Their eyes held no curiosity, no weariness from travel. They weren't lost. They were hunting. Jason's stomach turned cold. The tallest of the 4 men, the one with a scar like a cracked glass pane across his throat, gestured silently to the others. They pulled heavy crates from the back of the trucks. Equipment Jason didn't recognize. And one thing he did. Rifles. Not hunting rifles. Suppressed. Military grade. Jason felt his blood run ice cold. His mind screamed one word. Blaze. Jason didn't remember crossing the main road or bursting through Ethan's door. His voice was already shaking when he said the words out loud for the first time. They're here. Ethan's expression shifted instantly. Who? Jason's throat tightened. Hunters. Ethan didn't ask how Jason knew. He'd seen that look in his friend's eyes once before the night Liam was lost. Without another word, Ethan pulled his coat from the hook and followed Jason into the dark. From a ridge above the sawmill, Jason and Ethan watched the men unload their gear. Traps, steel snares, infrared drones, bloodbait, Jason whispered through gritted teeth. They're not just hunters. No, Ethan agreed. They're contractors. Jason's pulse hammered. Government. Ethan shook his head. Worse. Jason's breath hitched. Privates. Probably. Jason felt sick. Why here? Why now? Ethan's voice was hollow. Someone's paying them. Jason's heart cracked. It's Blaze. Ethan hesitated. You don't know that. Jason's voice broke. Yes, I do. He remembered the way Blaze stood beside Liam, the weight of trust in the wolf's golden eye. And now? Men like this had come to erase that trust. To erase him. Jason's fists clenched. I'm not letting that happen. Ethan didn't answer. Because in that moment, he wasn't just following his friend. He was believing him. Jason turned, staring into the darkness, where the forest swallowed the horizon. We're going to stop them. Ethan's jaw tightened. How? Jason's voice was steel. We fight. Ethan breathed deep, nodded once, and said nothing more. The town didn't believe Jason at first. They gathered inside the old church at his request. Every shop owner, logger, teacher, sheriff's deputy. Men and women weathered from mountain life, yet not prepared for the words Jason hurled at them. They're here to kill him. Silence met his declaration. Someone shifted uncomfortably in the pews. Jason's voice cracked. The Black Wolf. A murmur rippled through the room. He's real, someone whispered. Jason's fists trembled. He's real. And he saved my son. Skeptical glances. But then Ethan stood beside him. And I saw him too. That changed everything. Because if Ethan Monroe, the calmest, hardest man in Timber Ridge, stood with Jason Carter, then maybe, just maybe this wasn't madness. Jason stepped forward, raw, shaking, but unafraid. I'm not asking you to believe in a ghost. I'm asking you to believe in a life. He scanned the faces around him. He's not just a wolf. Pause. He's a guardian. Silence. They're here to wipe him out like they wiped out his pack. He pointed toward the darkness beyond the church doors. And I'm telling you now, not again. The room stayed silent. Then one voice broke it. Amelia. She stood at the back, holding Liam's hand. Her voice didn't shake. He saved my son. That was all she said. That was all she needed to say. The sheriff stood next. Then the owner of the feed store. Then the old nurse. One by one. Until every voice became one. Jason looked around. And for the first time since the storm, he didn't feel alone. By morning, the plan was simple. Defend the ridge. Jason knew Blaze wouldn't ask for protection. But they would give it anyway. Because some debts weren't repaid in words. Only in action. And Jason Carter was done standing still. The storm returned like a curse. Worse than before. The sky split open over Timber Ridge just after midnight, vomiting snow and waves. Trees bent their frozen limbs, creaking like bones. Winds howled so loud they swallowed every sound of the forest. But Jason heard it anyway. The gunshot. He bolted upright from the cabin floor. Liam, he called instinctively, stumbling toward the boys' room. Amelia's voice cracked behind him. What's happening? Jason's mind was already ahead of his body. He knew. They'd found Blaze. Ethan nearly skidded off the road in his truck as Jason leapt inside. Where? Jason's face was ice hollow. North Ridge. Ethan pressed the accelerator down so hard, the engine screamed. Neither spoke again. Not until the floodlights slicing through the snow revealed the truth. Bootprints, traps, and blood. Jason was out of the truck before Ethan stopped fully. He knelt beside the crimson streak staining the snow. Still warm. Blaze? Jason's pulse roared. They're close. Ethan racked his shotgun. Then we run. And they did. Far ahead in the choking dark, Blaze was running. Every muscle in his body burned. His lungs tore at his ribs, but he didn't slow. He couldn't. Bullets shredded the trees behind him, snapping branches, churning snow. He could smell them. Men, iron, oil, hate. But Blaze didn't fear death. He feared only one thing. Failing the child. Failing the trust. So he ran. Blood streamed from the wound in his flank, soaking his fur. He stumbled once, breath hitching. The scent of death thickened in his own nostrils. But he didn't stop. Not yet. Not while the boy still breathed. Jason and Ethan crashed through the snowdrifts like hunted men. Then Jason saw it, a shadow streaking through the trees. Massive. Wounded. Blaze. Jason screamed. Blaze. The wolf hesitated mid-stride. Then bullets tore past him again. Jason watched in horror as Blaze twisted, limping, struggling to keep ahead of the death chasing him. "He's running from them," Jason roared. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Then we make them run from us." Jason didn't hesitate. He followed the blood trail, followed the wolf, followed the only creature who had ever answered his son's cry for help. He wouldn't let him die now. Not alone, not hunted, not after everything, not like this. The next shot came closer. Blaze's body jerked sideways as a bullet sliced past his ribs, a burning kiss of death that missed ending him by inches. He couldn't run much farther. The snow was too deep, the pain too sharp, but he kept moving. Because somewhere ahead, he smelled him. The boy, faint, warm, alive. He had to reach him. He had to protect him. Then Blaze heard it. A voice, small, terrified. "Daddy." Blaze's heart spasmed inside his chest. He turned and saw Liam in the clearing, alone, calling. Blaze's pulse surged. No, the men were closing. Guns raised, aimed at the sound, aimed at the boy. Time slowed. Jason roared from the tree line. "Liam, run." Ethan fired blindly, trying to suppress the hunters. But they weren't aiming at him. They were aiming past him, at Liam, and Blaze understood. In that moment, every scar on his body, every old wound, every moment of pain meant nothing, because his purpose had returned. Blaze didn't hesitate. He lunged, not toward safety, but toward the boy, toward the child who'd touched his muzzle in the snow, the child who'd called him friend. A rifle cracked. Blaze threw himself between Liam and the barrel. The bullet struck him square in the shoulder. The force spun him sideways. The impact tore blood from his ribs. But Blaze did not fall. Not yet. He stood, barely, snarled, blood dripping, body trembling, and faced the men who thought they could end him. Jason reached Liam seconds later, grabbing his son, shielding him. He looked up and saw Blaze. The wolf stood between them and death, again, until his legs finally gave out. Blaze collapsed into the snow. Jason screamed, "No!" He ran to him, Liam sobbing in his arms. Blood soaked the snow. Ethan laid down cover fire. Jason dropped to his knees beside Blaze's crumpled body. The black wolf's chest rose, shallow, struggling. Jason cradled the massive broken head in his lap. "Stay with me, please, please." Blaze's golden eye flickered. Jason leaned close, voice cracking. "You saved him. You saved him again." Blaze's breath hitched. Once, then slowed. The snow kept falling. Jason's tears dripped onto Blaze's fur. "I won't let you die." He meant it. Jason Carter. The man who'd once feared the shadows beyond the trees now held them in his arms. And he wasn't letting go. Not now. Not ever. The world returned to him as pain. Blaze stirred, muscles twitching, breath ragged. Scents overwhelmed him first. Disinfectant, metal, oil. Not the forest. Not snow. He tried to move. Couldn't. Something heavy pinned his body. A bandage. Tight across his ribs. Machines hummed softly nearby. Human sounds. But no threats. Just waiting. His one good eye flickered open. Light. Blinding. Shapes shifted. Blurry. Then movement. Small. Familiar. Liam. The boy sat silently at the edge of the mat, where Blaze lay. One tiny hand rested lightly against Blaze's hind leg. Fingers curled softly into the coarse fur. Not gripping. Not clinging. Just touching. The boy didn't speak. Didn't cry. He watched. And waited. Blaze's breaths came faster now. Instinct screamed. But the boy's scent. Warm. Safe. Blaze stopped struggling. Jason stood behind his son, silent. He didn't approach. Didn't speak. This wasn't his moment. Blaze's eyes shifted slowly to Jason. For the first time, Jason didn't look at the wolf as a creature. He looked at him as a father who understood what it meant to lose everything and choose to protect anyway. Jason's voice cracked. "You're safe." Blaze didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, and for the first time since the bullet tore through his body, he let himself breathe. Minutes passed. Liam never let go. Jason watched in silence, then finally stepped forward, voice low. "Listen, old boy." Blaze's eye flicked toward him. Jason crouched, careful not to intrude, not to press. "You don't owe us anything." The wolf's breath rattled. Jason's voice cracked. "You can walk back into those woods. Tonight." A pause. "Or you can stay." Silence stretched thick between them. Jason whispered, "It's your choice." Blaze didn't move. Jason's voice broke lower. "We're not your pack." A breath. "But we're your family." Then Jason stood, stepped back, and waited. Blaze shifted painfully, dragging himself upright, despite every protest from his body. Liam gasped softly, but didn't pull his hand away. Blaze turned, slow, deliberate, facing the open door leading to the dark woods. "Freedom!" Jason's chest tightened. Liam's whisper was almost soundless. "Please, don't go." Blaze stood frozen in the doorway. Jason swallowed. "He's choosing." Then, Blaze did something Jason would never forget. The wolf looked over his shoulder. His golden eye flicked to Liam, then to Jason. And without a sound, Blaze turned. walked back, step by slow step. He lowered his massive body beside the boy and lay down. Jason exhaled, choked. He smiled, tears blurring his vision. Then he whispered, "He's chosen." Blaze closed his eye. Not as prey, not as predator, but as one of them. And this time he wasn't leaving. Spring came late to Timber Ridge. But it came. The snow melted slowly, reluctant to release its grip on the mountain. When it finally did, green returned in cautious touches, soft grass pressing through thawed earth, pine needles glistening wet with morning dew. And in the quiet heart of this reborn world, a boy walked. Not alone. Beside him, step for step, padded a black wolf. Blaze. The scars on his flanks had faded, but never disappeared. His torn ears still fluttered awkwardly when the wind caught it. His limp remained, though it slowed him little. And Liam Carter loved every broken part of him. The town had stopped calling Blaze a danger. They'd stopped calling him anything at all, because Blaze wasn't theirs. He belonged to one boy, and Liam never wandered without him. At the general store, Blaze would wait silently outside, until Liam emerged, his yellow eye tracking the boy's every move. When Liam played near the lake, Blaze circled patiently, never more than 10 feet away. If Liam laughed, Blaze's tail thumped softly in the grass. He wasn't a pet. He wasn't a guardian. He was a constant. A presence. A truth. Jason watched them from the porch most mornings, coffee untouched in his hands. He no longer wondered why Blaze stayed. He simply felt grateful. Blaze had chosen them, chosen his place, and that was enough. Still, Jason built him a bed, a real one, by the window in Liam's room. He constructed the frame himself, lined it with soft fleece, laid a thick cushion over fresh cedar shavings. Not a kennel, not a crate. A bed, because Blaze wasn't an animal. He was family. And Jason Carter wanted him to know that. On Liam's first day of school, Blaze wouldn't move. Jason remembered it clearly. The school bus had come rumbling down the narrow road, its brakes squealing as it halted at the driveway. Liam stood nervously, backpack too large for his small frame, glancing back at the porch where Blaze sat. "Will he be okay?" Liam asked softly. Jason knelt beside his son. "He'll be right here." But when Liam climbed the steps of the bus, Blaze rose. Without hesitation, the black wolf followed. Jason intercepted him halfway, placing a firm but gentle hand on the massive creature's shoulder. "Not this time, old boy." Blaze froze. His golden eye flicked toward Liam, disappearing inside the bus. Jason's voice cracked. "He'll come back." Blaze stood motionless as the bus pulled away. Then he sat, right there at the edge of the driveway, and didn't move. Not for hours. Not until the bus returned. Not until Liam stepped back onto solid ground. Only then did Blaze rise, tail flicking once, and fall into step beside the boy without a sound. Jason watched from the porch, tears blurring his vision. That night, after Liam had fallen asleep, Blaze lay in his usual place beside the window, his breathing steady. Jason stood silently in the doorway, the words thick in his throat. He finally said them aloud. "You're not waiting for him to come home." Pause. "You are home." Years passed, but some things never changed. Every night as Jason turned off the lights, he'd glance into Liam's room. The boy, now older, slept soundly. And beside him, the shadow remained. Blaze, always facing the window, always listening, always waiting. And as Jason watched, he knew one truth deeper than any other. Miracles didn't always come in flashes of light. Sometimes they came in the shape of a broken, silent guardian. With torn ears and tired paws, Jason whispered the words only once, but they stayed with him forever. "Sometimes a miracle isn't something that finds you." He paused. "It's something that refuses to leave." Then he turned and let the black wolf keep his vigil. Until morning,